And we're live. I would like to thank everyone who will be joining us or who will be watching the replay for another segment of the live stream wellness series. I am your host, Laqwanda Roberts-Buckley, and tonight we have a very special guest with us, Miss Toni Marie Preston. And we're going to be discussing understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, higher education, and beyond. Toni, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So, can you tell us more about yourself and why you chose to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion? I always let my guests choose the topic that they want to speak about, and so when I saw this one, I was like, well, let's dig in a little bit deeper and see what drew her around this. So, go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone, and then just let us know more about the topic you chose.
Of course. Hello, everyone. As Laqwanda stated, my name is Toni Marie Preston. I actually recently just graduated with my Master's of Social Work from the University of Illinois at Chicago with a concentration in organization and community practice. So I have about 5+ years of experience doing trainings, workshops, things of that nature in public speaking as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and specifically on my lived experience as a Black trans woman with sickle cell disease, and just, my lived experience, how that was in the academic space and academia, and also within the workplace and things of that nature. So that's a little bit about, me and my background.
Okay, so let's get right into the discussion. Can you explain the difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion to our audience? Because, when we hear those terms, we want to mix them all together and think if we have one, then it means we have the other. But can you break those down in a little simpler terms of what that really means individually?
Yes, of course. So diversity, when I think of diversity, I think about the different types of people that you have within a room or within a community, within a space, things of that nature. So usually when we think about diversity, we think about race. Usually, I feel as though, usually race is the kind of go-to topic when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But diversity can also be diversity in regards to gender identity. It can be in regards to sexual orientation. It can be in regards to neurodiversity or the opposite of neurodiversity, right? And so to me, that's what diversity means. And equity is about the people who are marginalized, people who are members of marginalized communities and groups. Are they granted the access that they need in order to not only survive in society but thrive? So to me, equity looks like not only meeting the bare minimum needs for people, but exceeding those needs, given the fact that, right, we know that systematic oppression exists, and that depending on your own identity or identities, that's going to determine your positionality in society. And so equity is about knowing that positionality of that person or that group and creating the opportunities, knowledge and tools and resources that that person or that community needs in order to, kind of equal the playing field, for lack of better words, right? Because we know that the playing field is not equal. And inclusion to me means making sure that everyone feels included, that everyone feels as though the space that they're in, that they have the power to utilize their voice, that they feel seen and heard, and that they're included, whether that's the workplace, higher education, and just embracing the diversity of the group or the space.
So, usually, when people think about diversity and inclusion, they also think about the word equality and maybe not equity. So, for this particular discussion, can you tell us the difference between equality and equity?
Yes. So to me, equality to me is kind of a term that was kind of coined by white liberals, if we're being honest. So equality, when we think of it, I think of, laws and how people a part of, different marginalized groups, we don't have the same legal rights as other people, right? So example, we can talk about, the civil rights movement, and we talk about, equality was during the civil rights movement was obtaining voting rights, right? That's one of the things that, the Black community was able to obtain during that time. But right, when we talk about equity, we talk about, how there was still voter suppression and how there is today, and how even though, right, there's this equality, it's still not equitable. Equity means access, right? And making sure that no matter who you are, or no matter what resources you have or lack thereof, you're able to access the needs that everyone has and should be afforded into society.
Okay. Thank you so much for breaking that down because, I know this, there's so many conversations and I hear, diversity, inclusion. There's like, oh, equality, equality, but people don't really look at the equity aspect as well. So thank you for adding that to the discussion. So let's dive into the workplace because that tends to be a general place where when we start thinking about diversity and inclusion and equity, we look at, when we go through the HR process, how they tell us, this is, we strive for diversity, or when we're filling out an application, they're like, volunteer us this information. Do you have a disability? All right. What's your gender? How do you identify with your race? Help us have these numbers. So, given the definitions you just provided, why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important in the workplace?
Yeah, so actually, there have been many studies to show that diversity, equity, and inclusion not only is economically beneficial to corporations and businesses, but also the folks who are working for these businesses and corporations. We know that oftentimes as marginalized people, sometimes we're the only one in that space, and sometimes we may not be comfortable to be ourselves. And we have all these different things to navigate within the workplace that someone who's more privileged may not have to, right? And so we have to be mindful that, people in positions of power and privilege have that comfort, and that no matter what your identity is, you deserve to be able to go to work and do your job, not experience harassment, not experience discrimination, and all these other things that marginalized people continue to experience, in the workplace. So that's to me the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Just making sure that everyone who is hired not only obtains the job but is happy in that job, and that the retention maintains at a level that it is good, because oftentimes we talk about hiring marginalized people and we get them in the door, but we also need to talk about what do we need to do to keep people at that place, at that workplace.
Okay. And and I want to throw this one in there because we had a recent Supreme Court ruling,
Mhm.
finally indicating that it's actually illegal to
Right.
discriminate against someone based upon their sexual orientation. And let me ask, and I've asked this in other panels, why do you think it took so long to get something so simple ruled? Because we had people who were getting fired or denied employment simply for being.
Hmm. I think, it took so long because I think the legal system is very behind. Um, when it comes to everything. But that's just, my own personal opinion. But I think, it takes so much to get a bill passed, and in regards to policy and legislation. And I think that that's something that a lot of people really don't know unless you're in that field or you've studied that, or, that's something that you're, interested in. And so, it really also depends on the political climate, right? Like who's in the House of Representatives and the Senate, and who are your state representatives, and are the people in those communities, do they have the power, ability, and access to be able to fight for certain issues, right? Oftentimes when we talk about marginalized people, we talk about the importance of people power, but also, right, we should be talking about how it's difficult to build people power, because usually people are working, right, minimum wage jobs, and don't really have the time to do organizing work and things of that nature. So you have to think, who has the privilege and the ability to do this type of work? And usually it is folks who have who are in positions of privilege and power and things of that nature. And so if they don't have, constituents coming to them, then they may not even see the issue, right? They may not have a connection to the issue at all. So, yeah.
Okay, great point. And so let me ask you this, because I've been noticing a lot of things over the past couple of months when it comes to some of these companies. So how have you seen companies, organizations, agencies, etc., fall short in terms of, and we're going to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we're going to shorten it and call it DEI. So when it comes to DEI, how have you seen those entities fall short?
I think that, time after time, I personally have seen, companies, they hire, for example, one Black trans woman at a nonprofit organization, doing kind of the entry level type of position. But, right, you don't have Black trans women, or queer Black women, or, folks of these different intersections and positions of power and privilege within these agencies and businesses and things like that. And to me, that's what diversity, equity, and inclusion is all about. It's not about, just having, yes, representation is important and it matters, but also having that power, and being in those positions is what, right, disrupt systems. It's what changes organizations and people and ideologies, right? So I think that's where a lot of companies and organizations are falling short. They're not really allowing people the opportunity to have these leadership positions, and it's really, not many, to be honest. So I think that's kind of something that I think companies and things of that nature should really work on. If you think that, people don't have the experience, maybe you need to create a program that allows people to build their leadership experience. I think people are not being innovative enough to really, if you say you're about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you need to be going above and beyond to really meet that mission.
I would agree. What are some ways that these entities, and I think you were touching on it, can ensure that their environment properly reflects DEI?
I think, like I said before, not only hiring, marginalized folks, but also putting marginalized folks in positions of power, um, offering, the resources and the access to be able to climb the ladder, right? Because, it's unfortunate, a lot of companies and organizations, they don't cover, trainings and continued education and things of that nature. And so, right, who has the money to be able to afford those type of things, is another factor. And is there mentorship available? Do people have adequate mentors? I know for me personally, throughout my undergraduate and graduate career, I really didn't have, any official mentors. I kind of just had to figure a lot of things out on my own and do my own research. And, it was a one-woman show. So
Yeah.
that was just, what it was. So really, thinking of innovative ways to be able to continue to implement best practices, right? Having folks at the table who do have, marginalized identities, something that's, I feel as though very important in the workplace are employee resource groups. So these are groups of employees who come together, who have a common shared identity, or who are allies or accomplices in regards to this certain identity. And you come together and you talk about the different things that's going on in the workplace, and you plan volunteer opportunities, and all types of things. And I think that community is really important within the workplace as well.
So we've been talking about organizations and larger entities, the macro level of things. But let's talk about the individual some. So let's say I'm a person. I'm looking for a job. I'm looking to connect with a company. And what are some things that I should look for to ensure that this company's has effective policies in place to promote DEI? Because I don't want to get somewhere and I don't feel safe, I don't feel included, I don't feel like supported simply because of my identities. So what are some things that I should be looking at and should be on my radar as an individual as I reach out, not only for a company to work for, but for a company that I may want to volunteer for, a company that I may want to support financially, fundraise for, donate to? What are some things that I should be looking at?
Mhm. Something that's always been really important to me is to always be connected to community. For me, that's something that I previously didn't have before. I didn't really have a strong connection to the Black, queer, and trans community, particularly in, Chicago, because I was at this, predominantly white institution in rural Illinois. So really being connected to community outside of the workplace is very important, because you get to know different people, and people work all over the place, and it also a lot of I would say queer and trans people of color do tend to work in nonprofit or in jobs that do tend to be service oriented. And so just kind of connecting with those folks and saying, like, hey, I've heard of this organization, they're looking for volunteers. Do you know anything about them? Have you volunteered for them before? So just really, making those, connections and friendships and bonds with people to kind of see, kind of get that inside scoop. It's kind of like you got to dig a little bit, to really, know what's going on within your city or your community and things of that nature. So, and in regards to job hunting, if you're looking for a position, definitely try to find someone who's worked there before. I actually recently reached out to someone regarding a job that I'm, applying for, and I asked her, what's the work environment like, just kind of getting a feel for, what's the workplace like and how was your experience, because you never know why someone left a company until you ask.
Yeah.
You're not going to go into an interview and they're not going to probably give you a legitimate, honest answer most of the time, right? Because they're trying to protect themselves, and at the end of the day, they still need somebody to work, right? So, really just being, you know, kind of friendly and honest and open, to try to get those answers that you need.
So let's say I'm already interested and I'm happy go lucky. I'm excited. I finally got this job. I needed to work. And then all of a sudden I began to notice a couple of things. So
Mhm.
what should I do when I realize the company, the organization, the agency that I'm connected to does not have an environment that reflects DEI?
Yes. I would say start to have those conversations like within, if you have any team meetings, if you have any manager meetings or supervisor meetings or anything like that. That's one option. Also, if there's someone, within the organization who, you feel comfortable talking to, who can actually, bring about some sort of change. If you personally may not feel comfortable, I would have a private conversation with them and just really remind them, because a lot of these agencies, they have some sort of mission and or values that are related to obtaining right equality or diversity, equity, inclusion, and things like that, because we live in a day and age where diversity, equity, inclusion are buzzwords, but a lot of people aren't really doing the work. And so just really holding people accountable, to the mission and values of that organization, and just trying to fight, to be honest. Sometimes you have to know when to pick and choose your battles. And I think, if you are not feeling like like the organization is fulfilling their mission and values, or you don't feel that the workplace is a space that you'd like to be in, I would say do the best that you can to change it. And if all else fails, you plan that extra strategy, and just know that it's better coming. It's better coming, and that that you've learned something from this, and now you have your certain expectations and standards, and move on to the next. Because we spend so much time at work. Why work somewhere where you're not really feeling fulfilled and welcome, right?
Most definitely. So, we talked about the workplace. And so let's slide over to higher education. What role does DEI play in the area of higher ed?
Yes. So in higher education, a lot of universities and colleges now, they have their cultural centers. So some universities, they have, multiple cultural centers that are designated for specific groups, like UIC, for example. They have an African American Cultural Center, an Arab American Cultural Center, which is very rare. So shout out to UIC for that. And a gender and sexuality center, which is actually where I had a grad assistantship, my first year of graduate school. So, cultural centers are a space where a lot of students, faculty, and staff can, kind of feel at home, because oftentimes when you are at a predominantly white institution, or even a HSI, Hispanic, predominantly like serving institution, you can feel like the minority, or you can kind of feel alone. And it's important to have that community. And those cultural centers definitely help, with that, but also on a greater scale. A lot of colleges and universities also have the dean of students, the vice president of academic affairs, and chief of diversity. So there are these different roles, and it's their responsibility to make sure that they are recruiting and retaining students, staff, and faculty from diverse backgrounds, and that the workplace is inclusive, and that they are really considering diversity, equity, and inclusion best practices, and continuing to strive for more. So
So, how does the lack of DEI in higher ed create barriers for students, faculty, and our staff?
yes, so the lack of DEI within higher education, higher education, as we know, is already a very historically white space, and that's why historically Black colleges and universities needed to be created, because people of color, Black folks, we weren't allowed, into the Harvards and the Yales, and things of that nature. And so, kind of now looking how it is now, you know, a lot of colleges and universities, they have certain initiatives, for example, for international students, and to retain different, student populations. And so, you know, I think within higher education, it's really just about how marginalized and minority students already don't have, access to certain opportunities, depending on, where you grew up and where you come from, and the level of education and that you kind of were afforded. and allowing those opportunities within higher education to be able to not only allow you to enter the college but also to graduate, right? We have trio programs and a whole lot of other different programs that focus on academic success and connection to community and things of that nature, because college is a whole experience. It's not just about getting good grades. It's about having that community is also important. So I think that's the goal is, or should be the goal of higher education, to make sure that we're not only recruiting diverse faculty, staff, and students, but also retaining, because we know that representation matters. When you have faculty and staff who look like you feel comfortable, you feel at home, you feel that sense of community.
So, can you share examples of how the lack of DEI negatively impacts the community in general?
Yes, so a lot of isolation can occur. I can from personal experience, I felt very isolated, being at a predominantly white institution and not really feeling comfortable with the Black community, because at the time I'm this Black queer gender nonconforming person, and then I kind of try to become involved with the white queer community, and not really feeling completely accepted there as well because of my race. And so it's really just so important that you feel, like I said, that sense of community. You feel seen and you feel represented, and you feel at home, because that's basically your home away from home. At least for me, I wasn't going home like some of the other students who were more privileged, who could afford to go home every other weekend or every month or whatever the case may be. And so right, there's economics, right, that factor into that as well. Like, can you even afford to go home, right? Do you even have that relationship with your family, right? Because we know a lot of queer and trans students of color may have been ostracized from their family, or may not have that close bond with them.
And I would have to add this as well, especially when we're speaking on higher education, and particularly faculty and students. And diversity and equity and inclusion is so important, because so many universities, including medical schools, are research based, and they have research centers, and they put out a wealth of information. And then we have other agencies, and we have governmental agencies, nonprofits, who will utilize that research and use it to distribute funding. And so we don't have research that is reflective of the entire community. Then we're missing that research. We're missing the whole population, and that population is missing out on particular sources of funding, because the research that is that's put in place or being published, is not a reflection of the community.
Yes.
We also have to look at our researchers, because our universities are so our ground are really some of the ground keepers when it comes to research coming out of John Hopkins. How many times they'll put out a study, and then everyone, you'll see it on the nightly news. And we want to make sure that research is inclusive and diverse, and showing a full representation of the population, and not just the particular groups that they.
Yes. And I think that's, something a lot of people don't realize, like, as you stated, like when you don't have diverse, faculty, in particular, if you don't have Black and brown professors of queer trans experience with disabilities, right? All these different intersections, usually marginalized folks, research is focused on those areas, because honestly, a lot of white folks, you really don't tend to have that area of interest unless it's, their area of interest, which I feel like really isn't as, as 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 relevant or as common, I should say. And so, it is important, because that is going to inform policy. People use research to inform policy. where they put, funding dollars into communities, into initiatives, into, all these different things that directly affect the lives of marginalized people, right? So if we don't have that research, there's also a gap, and issues when it comes to practice. We oftentimes, in social work talk about how social work is very, practice focused, and yes, we pull research from a lot of different fields, and social workers also conduct research ourselves. But we are very practice focused field. And if you don't have that research, there's going to be a gap in practice. If you don't have that faculty to teach you, how to serve a certain community, that knowledge and that practice is going to be off. It's not going to be rooted in cultural humility, right? Or even maybe not even cultural competency, right? So it's so important to continue to promote the funding of people who are pursuing research and things of that nature.
Most definitely. So if I'm a student, and thank goodness I'm not one of those anymore. It's been a long time. I'm done with that. But if I was a student, how can I make an impact on my campus to improve DEI? And do I even have a voice?
Well, I would first say you definitely have a voice. I had to find my own voice and really know that if it's not me, then who is it going to be? And sometimes you really have to ask yourself, like I said, sometimes you are the only one. And at that time, I was the only right out Black trans woman at that time. And so I had to speak up, and advocate for myself. And I feel like, having that passion for advocacy really comes from having sickle cell disease, and my mom kind of teaching me, like, you're getting older. Like, I know I'm your advocate and I'm your mom and I have to advocate for but you have to learn how to advocate for yourself. And so I kind of just transferred those skills, and higher education allowed me to learn different terminology and about my own lived experience and systems of oppression in the world around me, and allowed me to be able to talk about, different things, DEI and social justice, and the inequities that's occurring within society. And that's how we get to a place of the world that we desire to live in. And so I would say to anyone who feels like they don't have a voice, your story matters, and that you matter, and that fight for whatever you believe in and what you deserve and need.
So we talked about the workplace and we've talked about higher education. Could you tell us about other areas in which DEI plays a role?
So I would say that's a difficult question, because higher education and the workplace, those are like my two main focuses. But I think just in general, when we talk about um just as people, right? Like, are we being inclusive when it comes to language, right? Because we live in a society where you shouldn't assume someone's pronouns or gender identity, and things like that. So kind of in that regard, just as an individual, you want to make sure that you're being respectful of people, right? Like, that's just a part of being a good person to me. So I think those are the kind of things that we don't think about, where you have to think about how can you integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion into your everyday life. When it comes to having family conversations, right? If you hear someone say something problematic, call them out or call them in, because at the end of the day, that is continuing to perpetuate violence and discrimination, and all these things that we're trying to abolish and eliminate as a society. And so no matter whether it's the workplace or higher education, I think diversity, equity, inclusion matters, because marginalized people matter. We matter.
Mhm. I would also would say one area that it is extremely impactful is service delivery in terms of the medical field
Mm-hmm.
and community. Because people respond better when they see reflections of themselves.
Right.
People respond better when the individual is practicing from a position of cultural humility. And people, there is a historically justified reason that marginalized communities don't trust
Yes.
system in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes it important that, when we talk about service delivery, that we are also talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
Because, those key factors, not having those factors in that environment can turn someone or a community away from
Mm-hmm.
seeking services that they need.
Yes. Yes, and there's a long history with, as we know, the discrimination and the violence that's happened, with various different communities. I know for, trans people, and queer people, it's very, traumatizing to some people to even go to the doctor, right? Because they have to worry about, am I going to be misgendered? Is
Mm-hmm.
this person going to respect the name that I've chosen for myself and not dead name me, right? So all these different things, factor into, as you stated, the medical industry, and also just customer service in general. I think this pandemic has allowed us to realize how vital, essential workers are and people
Mm-hmm.
within the service field. Before, essential worker was not a term, at least not that
Mm-hmm.
I knew of. And so we now more than ever realize that, no matter what your role is in society, that, you deserve, right, a livable wage, right, where you can live comfortably, and that you have the necessities that, you need as a human being to survive, right? And so, I think, that's why diversity, equity, and inclusion is important, because, customer service is important. People are important, at the end of the day. Like, I'm all about, just making sure that people have what they need and what they deserve, and not trying to, as kind of, nitpick who are the deserving and the undeserving, right? Like, that's something that I kind of learned, in one of my women's and gender studies class. Sometimes when we think about poverty, we think about there are undeserving poor people, and that there are poor people who are deserving. And when we think about, poor people who are more deserving, we, that picture tends to be, right, poor white folks, right, who, just kind of fell on hard times, right? And when we think of undeserving poor people, we think of people of color, right, who may be receiving social benefits, or who also can have, fell on hard times, but because of, their skin color or their intersecting identities, there's this negative connotation attached and this stigma attached to, to them, and, receiving social benefits and all these other things. So it's kind of like, it all connects.
Most definitely. So, you had talked about the climate. I want to talk about the climate in the country. So, due to the current climate of the country, we are a race of people that are being traumatized, race of people that are being slaughtered, especially our Black trans sisters that are, being slaughtered. And no one, well, people are paying attention, but not as they should.
Right.
Um, so, because of these things that are taking place, we've seen more entities, companies, organizations, agencies begin to make these pledges to implement policies and practices surrounding DEI. What should the public look for to ensure these pledges aren't just buzzword or trendy ops, a good press op, trying to get covered,
Right.
you know, and to making sure that these companies are really following through and that we're holding them accountable, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the things that we're experiencing now, we've been experiencing for years, and
Yes.
none of these companies have been saying anything about it.
Nope.
Nothing, zero. Now
Not a word.
all of a sudden, everybody wants to jump on. I don't want
Black Lives Matter.
I don't want to disrespect our movement by saying bandwagon, but now all of a sudden it seems that when their earnings may be at risk.
Yeah, the
Being
economics, the
made.
profits.
So let's just call it for what it is.
Yes, yes.
You know, now they have a voice regarding what's going on, but we've been experiencing this for years because we have lists of people who
Yes.
passed away due to police brutalities. We have lists of
Mm-hmm.
our sisters of trans experience who have passed away and been slaughtered, and no one has been saying anything. But
Right.
now after all these years, we have people saying things. How can we, as as a group, as the public, what should we be looking for, to make sure that hey, we're not just going to say this. If you're
Right.
going to put it out there, we're going to make sure you do.
Yes. I think it's so important, in the era of Black Lives Matter, and all Black Lives Matter has just, I guess, recently kind of began to be more so in the spotlight now. Um, of course, not nearly as much as it needs to be, but just a little bit. They give us just a little. But definitely just continuing to hold these companies and corporations accountable, right? Like, you know, I think, we've seen historically what boycotting has done. And I think we're in an age of kind of noticing that, right? It's all about economics. And because we live in a capitalistic society, and so continuing to be very strategic, right? Like, I think it's so important, no matter what field you're in, to be involved in community in some type of way. I think we all have a place within this work, right? And I know that it's so important for us, as Black and brown, queer and trans people of color, to take care of ourselves and to survive and things like that. But also to know that, when we do have the capacity, that we need to be in community and, giving of our gifts and our time and our talents when we can, doing what we can. Not everyone is a, frontline type of person. There are people who are more so behind the scenes, who can plan, who can fundraise, who can, do all these different things. So I really encourage everyone, especially, white folks or folks who do have more privilege, power, and access, to use that in order to uplift all the campaigns. It's been so many GoFundMe fundraisers going on to support, Black and brown folks, especially Black and brown, queer and trans people. You know, contact those people, ask, do you need any help with anything, or is there anything I can do? Reach out to these organizations and see if there's any digital organizing you can do, because I know we are in the middle of the pandemic and we want to be safe. So just really kind of, being creative and thinking outside the box when it comes to organizing work and things like that. I think now more than ever we're realizing how important digital organizing is, and how sustainable it can be. And so I think that we should, continue to, be in community with each other and help each other, learn and grow, and hold each other accountable as well. Because I know sometimes, we have to hold each other accountable too. We have to call each other out and call each other in and educate each other, and so just keeping all those things in mind, I think, is really that unity is really gonna help when it comes to, holding corporations accountable. Because when we have that people power, I truly believe we are unstoppable.
So let me ask you this, because you did mention people power. What
Yes.
role do you see the 2020 elections playing in DEI?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that DEI is going to be a very big topic when it comes to this election, because of, everything that's happening. I think that, the candidates are going to talk about Black Lives Matter. They're going to talk about, the pandemic, and how, a lot of people of color have disproportionately been affected, because of, right, systematic oppression and all these other, things. But I think that we need to stay focused on right? The policies and their agendas. I think, that's something that I really didn't really focus on or realize or pay too much attention to before I was in my master's social work program. I learned a lot about, how do you track a bill? How do you know who's voting on these bills? Who co-sponsors these bills? And things of that nature. And so just really knowing the political past of someone is also very important. I know in Chicago we are very serious about that. Like even our own mayor, Lori Lightfoot, like it's a lot of us. We're like, we not really messing with Lori Lightfoot like that because she was a lawyer prosecuting people of color, to my knowledge, I believe. So just really knowing like what's the history of these politicians and how have their actions shown that they're really dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Because you can, talk with your mouth all day, but what actions have you shown? Where have you put your money where your mouth is? Have you really, sat down with leaders? There are so many queer and trans leaders of color who have been having conversations with celebrities and, politicians and things like that. And this isn't new. I remember I believe it was Angelica Ross, the trans actress who was on Pose. She had a conversation with, I believe it was Barack Obama or something like that. So, it's been done before. It's possible. So really just, really watching, and, analyzing very closely everything that people are saying and doing.
And one thing I would also like to add, especially when it comes to elections, is remember that certain positions, typically your executive positions, your mayor, your governor, your president has the authority to appoint individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So when they have the authority to appoint, then you need to understand who's going to be over your Department of Education, who
Right.
is going to be over your Department of Human Services, who's going to
Right.
be over these departments that you know impact our lives and control funding to so much of what we do. And
Mm-hmm.
that is, especially when we look at the presidential election, don't forget, you know, Supreme Court vacancies are starting to pop up, and we've already had, a justice added to the court. And so, those things come into play. So don't forget that, especially when we look at the executive branch, we're looking at individuals who have appointment authority. And we also want to look at our judges because in
Yeah.
certain jurisdictions, our judges are elected. And so you want to be mindful of that. So when there's a suit that comes up, who's the judge? What is this what has been this individual's history as an attorney? Because there usually have been attorneys in the past.
Right.
So those are key things to look at and to remember when you are, as Tony said, what's this person's history? What have they been doing before? Not just what they're saying during the election, but
Right.
they got a trail. So follow
Right.
the trail.
Because they're
And
gonna say anything during the
they're
election.
gonna
Let me
tell
tell
you
you.
anything. Follow that
Right.
trail.
Okay.
So Tony, in closing, what would you say to the audience regarding DEI?
I would say, just remember that, at the end of the day, we are all people. We all deserve, you know, legal, economic, social, equity, right? We all deserve to not only survive but thrive. I'm a big believer in, you know, putting the resources and creating initiatives and all of those things in place so people not only survive but thrive. When we oftentimes think about social services, it's very focused on serving the current needs of people, which is very important, but also creating long-term sustainable initiatives to be able to create equity for marginalized people and communities, and also that you have a voice and that your story matters and that you know you have a right to question your elected officials, right? To go visit your elected officials. You know, like I said, everyone has their own place. So I really just encourage everyone, no matter what they do or who they are, to uplift their voice, to let it be known that they're here and that, they deserve, to live in a society that they and their ancestors have dreamed of and that we're working towards and that we imagine for ourselves. So just never give up, keep fighting, and, we can do it.
So, Toni, thank you so much for joining us tonight for this amazing discussion. Can you tell our audience how they can reach you and how they can book you for an event?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much again for having me. This was a great discussion. I really, enjoyed tonight, and I look forward to all of your future guests. You all can reach me on a lot of my social medias, Facebook, Toni Marie Preston. I have a personal page and I also have a business page. You can add my personal page and like my business page. Also, my Instagram is the Toni Marie, THNTONIMARIE _ and you can email me if you're interested in booking me, Toni Marie Preston @gmail.com. And I also have a website as well where you can read about my work, and also book me through there as well. That's ToniMariePreston.life. So that's where everyone can find me.
All right. Thank you, Toni, so much again for joining us. Be sure to check out Toni if you want a dynamic speaker who is going to bring the facts, the truth, and tell it how it is in a professional and lovely manner. Thank you so much for joining everyone. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.